Some of the biggest songs in rock history exist because one rock star fell for another rock star's wife. Eric Clapton wrote one of the most performed guitar pieces of all time for a woman married to his closest friend. Keith Richards ran off with his own bandmate's girlfriend on a road trip through Spain, and George Harrison, a Beatle, slept with another Beatle's wife, then told the man to his face. These are the stories of rock stars who crossed lines that, in any other world, would end friendships forever. But in rock and roll, they sometimes ended up sharing stages, writing hit records, and attending each other's weddings. Let's start with the one that produced two of the most famous love songs ever written. There is a love letter written on a torn-out page of John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. The handwriting is small. It takes up barely a third of the page. It begins, "I am writing this note to you with the main purpose of ascertaining your feelings toward a subject well known to both of us." The author asks the recipient whether she still loves her husband or if she has another lover. It is signed mysteriously only E. The woman who received the letter showed it to her husband, assuming it was from some obsessed fan. She had no idea it was from her husband's best friend. The husband was George Harrison, the woman was Pattie Boyd, and the man who signed the letter E was Eric Clapton. Pattie Boyd was one of the leading international models during the 1960s and married George Harrison in 1966, experiencing the height of the Beatles' popularity. She had met Harrison after landing a role in the Fab Four's debut movie, A Hard Day's Night. For a time, they were one of the most photographed couples in the world. Harrison wrote multiple songs about her: I Need You, If I Needed Someone, Something, and For You Blue, the kind of songs that made women across the planet wish someone would write about them. But by the late 1960s, cracks had started to form. Their marriage began to disintegrate due to alcohol and drug overuse, as well as numerous affairs. And during this period, Harrison became a close friend of Eric Clapton, writing music and performing with him. Clapton was already one of the most respected guitarists alive, revered in blues and rock circles. And somewhere in the overlap between creative collaboration and late-night recording sessions, Clapton fell hopelessly in love with his friend's wife. It was not a passing infatuation. Clapton actively pursued Pattie Boyd romantically while she was married to Harrison. He wrote Layla in 1970 with Derek and the Dominos about his painful desire for the famous model. His mind couldn't escape from thinking about her, and his album Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs is a story of his unrequited love for Boyd. Clapton later said he drew inspiration from the story of Layla and Majnun by Persian writer Nizami, a tale of unattainable love that seemed to mirror his own tortured reality. Clapton grew bolder. He attended a party at his manager's home and confronted Boyd directly, asking whether she had received his anonymous letter. Boyd was shocked but at the same time flattered. She could not hide the unfolding melodrama from Harrison, who saw what was happening at the party. And then came the moment that has become legend. Boyd recalled Harrison's reaction when he arrived and saw Clapton with her. Eric said to George's face, "I have to tell you, man, that I'm in love with your wife." Harrison's response was not what anyone expected. Rather than erupting, he channeled the confrontation into something extraordinarily rock and roll. According to biographer Philip Norman, George set it up as a kind of guitar duel, trading licks, like a medieval tournament for the hand of a fair lady. Two of the greatest guitarists of their generation, seated across from each other, playing for the woman they both wanted. Harrison later reportedly said of Boyd and Clapton, "I'd rather she was with him than some dope." But Clapton did not win Pattie that night. Rejected, he spiraled. Clapton sank into heroin, and he had vowed he would if Boyd rejected him. In a desperate effort, Clapton even briefly dated Boyd's teenage sister, Paula. The obsession consumed years of his life. Meanwhile, Harrison was no saint in the marriage either. He carried on multiple affairs, and it wasn't a random fling that finally broke the marriage apart. It was something far closer to home, something that would warrant its own entry in this script. But we'll get to that. Harrison reportedly became increasingly difficult to live with, and his mood swings worsened, leading Boyd to make the decision to leave what she called a ludicrous and hateful life in 1974. After the split, once Clapton had beaten his heroin addiction, he again pursued Boyd, and after she had grown tired of Harrison's infidelity, she hedged her bets with Clapton. The two married in 1979, and they remained friendly with Harrison, who took to calling Clapton his husband-in-law, and even performed at their wedding. The twist: Clapton's years of pining and obsession did not translate into a fairy tale ending. Boyd left Clapton in April 1987 and divorced him in 1989. Her stated reasons were Clapton's years of alcoholism, as well as his numerous affairs, including one with Italian actress Lori Del Santo. She subsequently suspected that Clapton's pursuit of her had more to do with the competitive aspect of the two musicians' friendship. and that Eric just wanted what George had. 3 iconic love songs, Something, Layla, and Wonderful Tonight. 2 marriages to 2 rock legends. And looking back at all of it, Boyd has said that Harrison was her greatest love. The love triangle that shaped classic rock also left every person involved bruised. Rolling Stone referred to Boyd as a legendary rock muse, while the New York Times described the Boyd-Clapton-Harrison love triangle as one of the most mythical romantic entanglements in rock and roll history. But the Harrison story has another chapter, one that involves his fellow Beatle. While Eric Clapton was pursuing George Harrison's wife, Harrison himself was doing the same thing to someone else's. And not just anyone, he went after the wife of his own bandmate, Ringo Starr. In the early 1960s, the Beatles solidified as a group at the Cavern Club in Liverpool. One early fan who attended numerous shows was local teenager Maureen Cox, who struck up a romance with the band's drummer, Ringo Starr. In February 1965, well after Beatlemania took hold, Starr and Cox quickly got married on account of how she was pregnant. They went on to have 3 children. To the public, the Starrs were one of the most stable couples in the Beatles' orbit. But behind closed doors, things were unraveling. The final straw for Pattie Boyd's marriage to Harrison was when Harrison began having an affair with Maureen Starkey, Ringo Starr's wife. The hairdresser, who would disappear with Harrison, began flaunting a necklace that was a gift from him. This was not a discreet affair. Boyd recalled Maureen's attitude. She had the right to spend the night with George if she felt like it. I thought, this is being deliberately rubbed in my face. He and Maureen want me to know this is happening. Boyd even caught Starkey in one of the bedrooms of their 20-room home, lying on a mattress on the floor. Harrison, refusing to admit guilt, said, "She's a bit tired. She's having a rest." And in a staggering echo of what Clapton had done to him, Harrison told Ringo Starr directly, "I'm in love with your wife." According to the account, Starr's response was, "Better you than someone we don't know." Whether that response was stoicism, denial, or some peculiar form of Beatle brotherhood, it remains one of the most quoted lines in rock history. The affair's impact rippled outward. Harrison's grand passion for Maureen burned itself out after a time, but the damage was done on multiple fronts. Boyd left Harrison for Clapton in 1974, and for Ringo, the revelation added to what was already a marriage in serious trouble. The marriage suffered from Starr's own day-long drinking binges and multiple instances of philandering. After his relationship with Nancy Lee Andrews came to light in 1974, the Beatles' marriage was officially over. Ringo was subsequently granted a divorce in 1975, which he later admitted was mainly because of extramarital activities on his part rather than Maureen's affair with Harrison. Even so, biographer Philip Norman wrote bluntly, "You do not do that to another Beatles wife." That would seem to be unforgivable, but George and Ringo stayed friends. That's the Beatles for you. Marriages collapsed, wives were traded between best friends, and the men involved continued sharing stages and attending each other's weddings. The next story is from a band where the romantic entanglements were just as tangled, but the consequences were arguably even more devastating. In 1965, a fashion model walked backstage at a Rolling Stones concert in Munich and offered the band hashish. Anita Pallenberg attended her first Rolling Stones concert with a friend, managed to go backstage, and offered Brian Jones some marijuana and hashish before they headed to his hotel room. The pair quickly became a couple. Pallenberg was not your typical rock girlfriend. She was an Italian-German film actress, artist, and model, a style icon and it girl of the 1960s and 1970s, credited as the muse of the Rolling Stones. She spoke multiple languages, knew Andy Warhol, and had been modeling since she was 16. The Rolling Stones' personal assistant Joe Bergman put it plainly, "Anita is a Rolling Stone. She, Mick, Keith, and Brian were the Rolling Stones. Her influence has been profound. She keeps things crazy." But from the moment Pallenberg entered Brian Jones's life, Keith Richards was watching from across the room. Richards found her incredibly intriguing, hard to put into words. He started going to Brian's flat more often, not to see Brian, but to see Anita. In his 2010 memoir, Life, Richards admitted he was fascinated by her from what I thought was a safe distance. He wrote, "I could never figure out how he got his hands on her. The truth was, I'm looking at Anita, and I'm looking at Brian. And I'm thinking, there's nothing I can do about this. I'm going to have to be with her." Jones and Pallenberg's relationship was volatile from the start. Brian was insecure and incredibly jealous, and it's no secret that he was physically abusive with Anita, although she never took a second of abuse lying down. If Brian hit Anita, she would hit him right back. Jones' drug use accelerated his descent. According to accounts, Brian started seeing monsters falling out of cupboards. He started taking a mix of prescription drugs, dexedrine, amphetamines, STP, Mandrax, barbiturates, and started becoming aggressive. Then, in early 1967, everything changed on a road trip. Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Brian Jones had been busted for drug possession in England. With court cases pending, they decided a holiday in Morocco would do them good. Mick Jagger flew to Tangier with Marianne Faithfull, while Richards, Jones, and Pallenberg opted to drive through France and Spain in Richards' Bentley. By the time the car reached the Pyrenees, Brian fell ill and was transferred to a Toulouse hospital with pneumonia. The rest of the entourage continued the road trip through Spain. And that is when, somewhere between Barcelona and Valencia, the course of the Rolling Stones changed forever. According to Anita and Keith, they started their relationship in late February or early March of 1967. During that road trip, when Brian Jones was taken ill and Keith and Anita were left alone, Richards remembered it vividly, describing the smell of orange trees and checking into a hotel as Count and Countess Ziegenpuss. But as he noted, Anita was still with Brian. Brian Jones rejoined the band in Marrakech, but was suspicious that something had happened between Keith and Anita while he was away. Richards later recalled the tension. Brian must have sensed something about Anita and me. The confrontation came in Tangier. Checking himself out of the hospital, Jones caught up with the pair at their hotel room. He ordered 2 prostitutes and insisted Anita join in. She refused. He ordered room service and started throwing food at her. Keith reportedly said, "We can't go on like this. Let's split." She and Keith abandoned Brian and left for England. Brian Jones never recovered from the betrayal. Not emotionally, not creatively, and not physically. His departure from the Rolling Stones was all but sealed, and the situation resolved itself with the drowning death of Jones in 1969, after having ingested a large quantity of tranquilizers. He was 27 years old. Richards and Pallenberg stayed together from 1967 to 1980, living a wild life and bringing 3 children into the world, although they were never married. Their son Marlon was born in 1969, daughter Angela in 1972, and their 3rd child, Tara, died unexpectedly of SIDS at only 2 months old in 1976. But the Pallenberg saga does not end with Keith. Keith Richards always suspected an affair between Mick Jagger and Pallenberg. During the filming of Performance, the 1970 film cast Jagger opposite Pallenberg, and the chemistry on screen was reportedly not all acting. By the time Jones drowned in 1969, Pallenberg had been sexually involved with 2, possibly 3 Rolling Stones. One woman, 3 or more members of the same band. That is a level of entanglement that even Fleetwood Mac would struggle to match. Speaking of which, if there is one band in history that is synonymous with romantic chaos between its members, it is Fleetwood Mac. Their 1977 album, Rumors, is not just one of the best-selling records of all time. It is effectively a breakup album written by an entire band going through simultaneous breakups with each other. Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham were already lovers and collaborators. When they joined Fleetwood Mac in 1975, Nicks would eventually have an affair with Mick Fleetwood, whose wife once had an affair with one-time Fleetwood Mac guitarist Bob Weston, resulting in Weston getting kicked out of the band. On top of that, Christine McVie and bassist John McVie were married for years, until they broke up in the months before Rumors. Let's untangle this web, piece by piece. First, Mick Fleetwood married model Jenny Boyd in 1970. During their first marriage, Boyd had a 2-week affair with Bob Weston, Fleetwood Mac's guitarist, which resulted in him being fired. Mick and Jenny's first marriage lasted from 1970 to 1976, during which the affair with Weston occurred. Their second marriage lasted from 1977 to 1978. Why did their second marriage collapse so quickly? That same year, 1977, Fleetwood had an affair with Stevie Nicks amid their Rumors tour. Boyd and Fleetwood split for good in 1978 in the wake of the scandal. Fleetwood began the affair with Nicks after a show in New Zealand, following the release of Rumors. Nicks later said, "Mick and I were absolutely horrified that this happened. We didn't tell anybody until the very end, and then it blew up and was over." Jenny Boyd told her side of the story in her autobiography, Jennifer Juniper. Fleetwood's intense focus on his career, long periods on the road, and cocaine use, alongside Boyd's own struggle with addiction and the Bob Weston affair, had already strained their relationship. Then Mick confessed. Jenny wrote of their reunion attempt, "When he pulled out a white packet from his waistcoat pocket, I tried not to show my disappointment. Mick then informed her, 'There's something I ought to tell you,' and the Fleetwood-Nicks affair had its own betrayal sequel. While Mick was having an affair with Stevie Nicks, he began another affair with Sarah Ricord, Nick's best friend, who was at the time married to record producer Jim Record. Ultimately, Mick Fleetwood and Sarah moved in together and eventually married. Nicks channeled her devastation into music. Stevie recalled, "I had started to see Mick Fleetwood romantically. I had a very dear friend whose name was Sarah, who just went after Mick, and they fell in love. And the next thing, Sarah's husband is calling me to say, 'Sarah moved in with Mick this morning.'" The song Sarah, one of Fleetwood Mac's most haunting tracks, was born from this betrayal. Meanwhile, the Buckingham-Nicks relationship was its own parallel drama. Fleetwood Mac almost single-handedly wrote the book on bands in relationships in the 70s, and their gargantuan rumors largely chronicled the breakup between Nicks and Buckingham. They were a romantically involved singer-songwriter duo when they boarded Mick Fleetwood's outfit on New Year's Eve 1974. Fleetwood Mac produced the 1977 album they would be most famously known for. While most of its members were in the midst of romantic breakups, married band members Christine and John McVie started recording the album on the brink of divorce, and Christine started openly having a relationship with the band's lighting director, and the longtime partners Nicks and Buckingham had a volatile breakup and penned songs about each other, while Mick Fleetwood learned of an affair between his wife and his friend, which eventually prompted his own affair with Nicks. Think about this for a moment. Bob Weston slept with Mick Fleetwood's wife and got fired. Mick Fleetwood then slept with his own bandmate Stevie Nicks while remarried to Jenny. He then left Nicks for her best friend, Sarah Ricord. Buckingham and Nicks imploded. Christine and John McVie divorced. And somehow, through all of it, Buckingham and Nicks contributed to much of Fleetwood Mac's later commercial success, while Fleetwood's own determination to keep the band together was essential to the band's longevity. The result was a band that made music soaked in real heartbreak, real rage, and real betrayal, performed by people who had inflicted that pain on each other. There is no album in rock history that carries more genuine emotional devastation in its DNA than Rumors, and the reason is simple. Every note was written by someone sleeping with, or reeling from, someone else in the same room. And yet, Jenny Boyd's older sister, Patty, was married to both George Harrison and Eric Clapton. The Boyd sisters were at the center of rock's two most sprawling romantic webs, the Beatles-Clapton triangle and the Fleetwood Mac entanglement. The world of classic rock was, in a very real sense, one enormous interconnected mess. The 1960s vocal group, the Mamas and the Papas, were one of the defining acts of the California sound. Gorgeous harmonies, sun-soaked melodies, and an image of carefree counterculture bliss. Behind that image was a minefield of infidelity. Husband and wife singer-songwriters John and Michelle Phillips married on New Year's Eve 1962, and 3 years later formed the Mamas and the Papas in Los Angeles. With Denny Doherty and Mama Cass Elliot, for a brief window, they were one of the biggest groups in America. But the group's internal dynamics were combustible from the start. While recording the band's 1966 self-titled album, Michelle Phillips let it slip that she was having an affair with the Byrds' Gene Clark. Her husband, fellow member John Phillips, had previously forgiven his wife for cheating on him with bandmate Denny Doherty. That's right, Michelle had already slept with a member of her own band before the Gene Clark affair came to light. Denny Doherty, one of the group's four voices, had carried on an affair with the wife of the man he stood next to on stage every night. John Phillips had somehow swallowed that betrayal and kept the band going. But when the Gene Clark situation surfaced, the dam broke. This time, John was understandably angry. Determined to fire Michelle, he met with his attorney, consulted with the rest of the band, and inevitably gave her the boot in June of 1966. Joe Gibson replaced her, but the band only lasted another 2 years before breaking up entirely. Affairs with Gene Clark of the Byrds and bandmate Doherty led to Michelle's brief ejection from the band in June 1966. Though she was rehired in August, the Mamas and the Papas split in 1969, the same year as John and Michelle Phillips divorced. The story of the Mamas and the Papas is often overshadowed by the more dramatic sagas of the Stones and Fleetwood Mac, but it contains the same core ingredients: a band member sleeping with another band member's wife, a fragile creative partnership held together by willful denial, and an inevitable collapse when the weight of the betrayal becomes too much to carry. When you look at these stories side by side, a pattern emerges that goes beyond individual moral failings. These were people who spent every waking hour together, on tour buses, in recording studios, at after parties, on holiday. The normal boundaries that protect marriages, distance, separate social lives, time apart, simply did not exist in the world of rock and roll. Finding romance with a bandmate makes a lot of sense in some ways. Musicians spend months of the year on the road, leaving behind family, friends, and significant others. And if you're dating someone in the band, touring suddenly becomes more tolerable, since they're with you for the journey. But the flip side of that coin is that your significant other is with you from the moment you get up until the moment you fall asleep. And when you get in a fight, there's virtually no time to decompress before getting back on the bus together. Now extend that dynamic to a world where someone's spouse is backstage every night, where cocaine and alcohol erase inhibitions, where the adrenaline of performing for thousands of screaming fans charges every interaction with an electric intensity. Add egos the size of arenas, wealth that eliminates consequences, and a culture that rewards rebellion against every social norm. The wonder is not that these affairs happened. The wonder is that any rock marriages survived at all. Eric Clapton pursued Pattie Boyd for nearly a decade, wrote one of the greatest rock songs ever written about her, eventually married her, then cheated on her himself. George Harrison lectured everyone about spirituality while sleeping with his drummer's wife. Keith Richards fell in love with his bandmate's girlfriend, essentially stole her on a road trip, and watched his bandmate spiral into the void. Mick Fleetwood slept with his bandmate while his wife was waiting at home, then left that bandmate for her best friend. In each of these stories, the affair did not just affect two people. It fractured bands, ended careers, fueled addictions, and in at least one case, Brian Jones, it arguably contributed to a death. But it also produced some of the greatest music ever recorded. Layla does not exist without obsession. Something does not exist without devotion. Dreams and Go Your Own Way do not exist without people who loved each other, tearing each other apart in a recording studio. Bianca Jagger, who had her own turbulent marriage to Mick, summed it up as bluntly as anyone ever has. It's probably the most male chauvinistic-oriented society. A rock star is the worst husband a woman could have. These stories are not ancient history. They shaped the songs that still play on every radio station, in every bar and at every wedding. And every time Layla comes on, or something plays, or Dreams floats through a room, you are hearing the sound of a rock star who fell for someone who belonged to someone else. And the wreckage that followed, that is the cost of rock and roll.